Hello, everyone. This is the Araucast episode 14. I'm Beppe once again, starting the episode, starting this conversation. And let me start with the announcements. This time they're a bit short. If you remember, I have set up a Matrix channel for Matrix Room, a Matrix community for whoever wants to join there and talk with us via text and so on. And this weekend, I found out how to properly bridge it with Discord. Matrix integration bots have those nice shenanigans where you can send messages back and forth, multiple services. Now I managed to. I have a Discord bridge that I'll link also in the description. But this bridge is not a bridge. This room is bridged to the Matrix room, and users on both platforms are able to interact if they have their accounts properly set up and all that. There are some instructions there. It's not a very easy and straightforward process, but I think I have figured out. Emerald helped me setting that up, testing that. So if you have both a Discord and a Matrix account, you're able to have this cross-posting functionality. Pretty cool. Maybe I'm the only one who likes it because I'm a millennial, but I found it to be cool. Okay, that said, for this episode, we still have Emerald here, and Hermit has returned. So welcome, guys, and welcome back, Hermit, especially. How are you guys doing?
Well, I have to say, I hope it doesn't come off too cheesy, but I have missed you guys, honestly and sincerely, and I have missed doing this podcast. And again, I'm looking forward, as always, to having some nice conversations, which we can't usually have, or this is the appropriate space and the appropriate co-host. It's a good place to be, and I'm glad we are doing another episode.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back, Hermit. It's always nice to have you here. Your insights are always great, and I can also say the same. It's always a great experience. This is it's very fortunate to be part of this podcast, and it's a pleasure to be here as always.
Yeah, and I can say that in all seriousness that you're missed. All people here have something to add. We have Emerald here to tone down the autism incredibly and give us some more literary references. We have Hermit here to have a more, how can I say, politically zoomer takes on stuff, and I'm here to edit the episode basically. Okay, let's start. To cut things short, our topic today: Secession, the practice of giving independence to a chunk of a country or something, of achieving independence from another state or something. There's a lot to talk about this, and I have the expectation that we have diverging opinions regarding that topic. That's a good thing inside a certain spectrum. We cannot. I'm not really a fan of debating things when there's too many disagreements, fundamental disagreements. I remember once debating a colleague who was pretty much had a completely liberal worldview, and I spent, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours debating the guy, and at the end we we were at the same spot, really. So it was pretty frustrating. But when we're dealing with details, with uh, even different information and so on, but we have the basics, the same set of principles or almost the same, it's always a positive experience. But I'll make an effort as well to be kind of a devil's advocate for points that are not necessarily mine, but I'm trying to comprehend. Okay, Succession. It's not a topic we see being brought that much in media. Here in my region, in my particular region, it's kind of a recurrent theme, and I'll get into that. But on the world stage, I think the last time I have heard something about it, maybe Texas in the US. There was some talk about Texas succeeding from the US. There was even a Tom Woods episode with a supposed representative of this idea. There's a lot to say about it. And maybe Catalonia as well in Spain. And in practice, we have South Sudan. I think is the newest country in the world, right? They succeeded from Sudan, but they are still at war. And I wouldn't blame Secession for this, but that's a region that's always unstable, right? But I mean, we we have to debate here. We have to reach some kind of conclusion on whether Secession is a good or a bad thing, and on which conditions. When you see the case of Texas, initially I thought about, okay, that seems like a nice thing because they have infrastructure and so on. Uh, Actually, their power grid, it's already made in a way that allows them to succeed more easily. I think their power grid, their electricity grid, it's all decoupled from the national one. So they have this in mind. They had this in mind for a long time. And usually I think, okay, it seems nice if people there want to do this. I'm all for it because having more independence, being able to take decisions more locally, subsidiarity is always nice. But then you start looking at certain stuff and and wonder, well, something is a bit iffy there. Because I remember there was a statement, kind of an official statement, when they were mentioning, which was pretty Russian coded actually. I remember they mentioning, oh, Texas has all the conditions to be an independent state because they have warm seaports. Okay, warm seaports. Who says that? Right? That's not an American coded way of saying things. That's a Russian coded way of saying things. And because Russia has this issue, right? They have Kaliningrad, which is their warm seaport for the winter. If they rely a lot on that because they do not have any other way to access the North Sea or even the Mediterranean. They are constrained by the Bosphorus and so on. So they have this terminology. And when I look at the Tom Woods having this gas, which is supposedly from this movement, uh, considering the gas that Tom Woods has been receiving lately, which are pretty anti-interventionist, quote unquote, pro-Russia, uh, that sounds a bit iffy. You can start seeing that this kind of movement can be weaponized. I mean, it's clear in the case of Donbass and Luhansk, right? People say, oh, people talk about the independence of the Russian minorities and so on, but we're not innocent here. It's not a secession movement. Those territories, they will be 1 nanosecond after being independent, they will be absorbed by the Russian Federation. So it's just an annexation. But you can weaponize that stuff. Sometimes you should leave for a while the things you believe in and start looking at things that your opponents or other people, other factions believe in. There's a I remember there are many influencers tied to the Eurasianist stuff who were pushing for Texas independence. It was super weird uh, but they do this because they see secession as a way to weaken countries, to weaken their enemies, right? So of course they're going to support it. But when it comes to succession in Brazil, for instance, or any third world country, they would be they would be pretty much against this, right? In the case of Catalonia as well, you can say, oh, it's a bunch of leftists. Catalonia is a pretty leftist region. Yeah, but you can say, oh, let them succeed, then they will have to pay their bills. In the first moment, you can make the case for this, but when you look at this, do I really want this leftist faction to have more independence, more control of Catalonia as a pretty rich region? Maybe they'll have the resources to back movements around the world. Who knows? So it's never that easy. At first, I have my sentiment of valuing this kind of independence movements, but you can see how those things can be weaponized for a lot of stuff. At times, even the motivations are not as healthy as you would like. I mean, I have extended myself for too long, but that's the general view I have of this. I like it personally, but I have to recognize that there are points where it's iffy, right? I don't know what you guys think.
Well, allow me to do a little more exposition. I know Beppe has already given you guys a bit of exposition, but allow me some time because uh, I believe it is important to set the stage for mainly why we have chosen this topic. Here in Brazil, we have discussed previously, there is great uh, uh, veiled enmity between Brazilian regions and a very strong sense of resentment between competing kind of sub nations or whatever you want to call it. Specifically, we have had during all of Brazilian history a a big movement of secession and unity. By that, basically every single state of Brazil was probably once part of a secession. Uh, the Northeast seceded in the Confederation of the Equator. The North seceded in the Confederation of the Grão-Pará, and the South seceded in the Farroupilha Revolt. Minas Gerais seceded. São Paulo seceded. Were all also brought back into the fold. So secession is much more of a part of Brazilian history than you could think of the US, which is basically the case study in history, mainly because we live in an American system, but because the Civil War was such a nation-defining moment. This historical exposition set aside, what interests me in this theme is that it is, in a strange way, very passionate, not by the people who you would imagine, because secession, you would believe, is generally thought as a movement spurred on by the people who want to secede. But what I see is that in most cases, the people who want to most talk about secession are the ones opposed to it. For instance, in Brazil, sovereign independence is a general idea, not as much a political movement, but a more or less articulated feeling or opinion. But expressing a bit or a single bit of this idea is enough to get a visceral reaction for a lot of people. And I just want to get this straight out of the way myself. I'm not a secessionist and I don't support it, but seeing how much people react to it kind of gives me some off vibes of why is secession so hated when, it is kind of indifferent, right? It is not like your destiny depends on a certain group of people living under the same country as you, at least in an individual level. So of course we're going to have to think of this in a much more idealistic or nationalistic in a nationalistic framework. But that's what it is curious to me, and that's what I think is a good point for us to delve in. Beppe raised some good points, which are, I think, a good starting point, because anti-secession is felt more strongly on the nationalistic types and the sovereignists, which we have discussed previously. And there are, of course, some apparent contradictions, such as the support for the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, which are secessionists, There's also South Ossetia, if I'm not mistaken, and Abkhazia, which are all secession states, which I guess don't seem to get a lot of hate, but in Brazil they would feel a lot of hate. But at the same time, if a secession movement kicked off in Bolivia trying to join Brazil, they would probably be in favor of it. So the main goal of this episode, I think, is for us to delve into these questions of why do people have such visceral reactions to secession, and why do they support it in some cases and others not, and when is it legitimate, why do even people consider it, and etc.
That's a very interesting point. I wasn't thinking exactly about it through these lenses, but I think many people are allergic to the idea of secession is because deep down they want to be the empire. They want to feel that. They want to feel that they are more important in a way. They don't want. They want to be Romans. They don't want to be Sicilians. um, and That's purely a psychological thing that is very exploitable in politics, because people rarely, for example, vote being thinking about things that rationally are good for them or materially good for them. They vote basically uh, through uh, tricks, psychological tricks. That's how mass psychology works. You know, Le Bon, all the Machiavellians of the last century. Le Bon influenced Mussolini, Hitler, and many other big leaders from the previous century. And his greatest point is that it's a crowd. You're not going to win a crowd with reason and logic. You have to appeal to their sentiments, to their passions. Secession and other, well, that's true for most, if not all, political issues, but it's something that requires masses to move, and masses do not act like individuals would. An individual inside of a big mass is not the same thing as the very same individual by himself in his house making food and forming his opinions. So you can't reason with these people. It's not about that. But at the same time, I think there's something reasonable about trying to keep an empire. I mean, that's not for everyone. You shouldn't try to be an empire if you can't. But there's reason for them to think that way too. They probably can't articulate it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
You guys gave a good rundown of things. There are aspects that I wasn't thinking about, but those are good for me to go to a different topic, which is the reactions, right? As Hermit mentioned, it's very quick to spark a reaction. It's very easy to spark a reaction. Here in southern Brazil, for instance, maybe I think a year ago or something, the governor of my state made an almost joke about it. Oh, if things don't go well, because he's from the opposition. This governor is not very fond of our current president. So he mentioned, oh, if things don't go well, let's make a southern state and be done with it. And that led to a huge uproar. And when it comes to the reactions, I think you can see it in many levels. When you look at internet discourse, uh, there's all those accounts or many people, those nationalistic profiles and so on, and they are in the lowest level, I believe, taken by this paradox mentality, right? Paradox game mentality. They want to see the map grow bigger. There is this case that you mentioned of the parts of Bolivia potentially wanting to be part of Brazil, parts of Argentina potentially wanting to be part of Brazil, and those guys are celebrating it, even if those places are nothing burgers, right? You have a huge ass territory that is most of it has never been properly developed, has never been properly occupied. Why you're concerned about this extra tiny piece of land? It's just because you want to look at the map and see it bigger. I remember getting into an argument with a guy who was defending that Brazil takes this tiny village in the frontier of Uruguay because the government at some point created a villa to occupy the region and nobody lives there. I think because nobody wants to live there. But I'd say, but for some reason, that's such an important issue, and not caring about it makes me an idiot or something. You see, there's this paradox game mentality because you just want to annex territory. It's a nice feeling, right? I play Europa Universalis. I play Imperator. It's nice to see your territory grow bigger and bigger. Your color painting the map, but it's a very primitive way of looking at things. On the other hand, going uh, to some more higher levels, there's the matter of money, right? When you look at Brazil, for instance, as we have commented in the episode about South Africanization and such, there's a kind of a predatory relationship here. You see there's more uh, more southern and southeastern states basically pay the bill. They give a lot of taxes for the federal government, do not receive back as much, and keep sustaining and keep supporting the northernmost states, right? To have this parasite host relationship. When some states in the north, for instance, the only thing that they manage to produce and export apparently are Congress people, right? Like 7 or 9 times the president of the Senate was a guy from Amapá, which is a man. The place is almost inhospitable, right? It's a barely developed state, and he only exports those politicians who keep getting more and more tax money that go nowhere. And they have no incentive to change this because they can, under our current our federal pact, which is not really federal, they can keep exploiting the richer states indefinitely. So there's no incentive to make their states richer and more developed and so on, to apply this money properly. So over time, this is the first level of resentment that keeps growing. It's money based. Okay, they keep exploiting us, and we're never getting anything back. There's also the issue of power, right? The libido dominandi. When you look at even the population, the feeling that you control the life of someone else is, I mean, it fascinates a lot of people, right? The idea that someone that you loathe from a different place at some point can give you a middle finger and carry on his own life, it's a bit upsetting. We see this. I have experienced this as well. If I just talk about, oh, I want that people from my region start taking control of their own lives, start taking making their own decisions and so on, you'll get people upset by this. I want these people to protect themselves, to preserve themselves, and they get upset. Someone from somewhere else get upset by this because maybe there's this idea of, oh, how dare you don't want to live alongside me, right? Maybe people deep down want to be loved or just want this feeling of power, this libido dominandi. And there's also the more strategic way of looking at this, right? People just having access to a bigger country. When you have a bigger country, more resources, there's a bigger pot, there's a bigger prize to get if you dominate politics, right? It's much more profitable to invest and dominate American politics, for instance, than Georgian politics, right? And that's actually one of the reasons my more charitable view of American ideology, for instance, is that people always say, "Oh, all the bad things in the world comes from America. All those bad ideologies, all those bad trends come from America." In my opinion, the thing is, many ideological groups, pressure groups, they see America as this honeypot. They always have representatives there because if they manage to get some political power there, they get resources from the most resourceful nation in the world, and then they can start financing people abroad, right? So it's not that the ideologies all start there, but it attracts all the ideologies because they need funds for propaganda, astroturfing, and all that stuff. So, of course, in some cases, secession would be against those interests, right? It makes things more difficult. So people would be against this as well. And I mean, there are many layers you can see this kind of position, but yeah, I'll pass it on to you guys. What do you guys think about this?
What I'm interested in is largely the main question of this episode is that a lot of people see secession through a moral lens. By that, whenever you say you support secession, eh, people look at you like you have a moral flaw in your character, that you somehow hate your own nation, or that you hate Brazilians, or that you hate other peoples, and etc. And this kind of simplistic view and this kind of guttural, instinctual rejection of secession, or for whatever cause it may be that this reaction is spawned, uh, usually ignores the multiple factors that leave people disposed to consider such alternatives. And in a large part, this creates a blind spot on the debate sphere. I'm usually worried about this discourse because it is very prevalent, surprisingly, amongst the right wing. And of course, the right wing doesn't need to be pro secession. What I think is most prescient is for us to consider why do people consider secession. And truly, I believe that secession is not the problem itself, although it could be a problem, and I don't think it would solve many issues. I just think that instead of thinking too much of it as a moral evil or as a character flaw, but as a symptom of a failing state and of a failing nation, and we would be better advised or to look to these causes of why do people want to secede instead of the what they're doing, instead of the you are seceding or you are supporting secession, therefore you are evil. The same thing happens, I think, with a lot of these profiles of, Brazil is a shithole, or Brazil is unbearable, or Brazil is just a hell on earth, and etc. Which we know it in a large part. It is true. I mean, it is true enough to resonate with a lot of people, but it is also exaggerated. These problems are exaggerated, and often people can find themselves in this doom spiral where they only see the bad sides of their own country and etc. But their mind is in the right place. They are seeing true problems. They have just fallen deep down on the pit of despair and of delusion, not delusion, or more like disenchantment with their own country. They have lost faith and confidence in the ability of a turnaround happening, that they start turning to these solutions. And that's what I wanted to discuss with you guys in this episode. Is I don't think secession is a solution, but more of a symptom of a problem.
I think secession can be a solution to many problems, and if you think of the morals that it would bring, the morale, better, better yet, because people would at least be able to think, oh, I might be making a mistake, but let me die on my footsteps. Let me choose my path. Let me pick my own poison. Which, to be fair, is a sentiment I frankly sympathize with a lot. But I don't think people oppose it necessarily because of utilitarian reasons. Because yes, many people do have the idea that having more resources necessarily means that they're richer and somehow they have a better life because of it, which, I mean, it's just not true. But there's also something you mentioned previously, Hermit, about the resentment between regions. Because I think many people who oppose, for example, the Southern secession, they just do it because they like the idea of making the Southerners submit to their will. Oh, you want this so bad, right? But you'll only have it if I let you have it, and I don't. If it depends on me, you will never have it. I don't know if what is the biggest reason, but the moral argument isn't necessarily what I see the most. But that's probably because I live in a region that, they see secession as an exclusively Southern sentiment, and they don't understand it. They don't, frankly, they don't take it quite seriously, and they also make the same economic arguments. I think these arguments are flawed, but even if they were true, I don't think they are the main motive that secessionist movements have in Brazil, right? Again, I think the psychology of the person who is against it isn't moved by positives, but by negatives. Even though, like you said, secession should be something very familiar to Brazilians. And this is something I've heard, but some people think it's something American, like, it's an ideology that came from America because they know that there are some people in Texas or something that want to secede. But even if that were the case, I don't see how that would be necessarily a problem because, yes, like Beppe said, some bad ideologies come from America, right? But many great things, many great ideas come from America too. It's very hard for me to sympathize with people who say things like, "Oh, the big Satan of the North," referring to the U.S. in this dismissive and frankly theatrical way. Because as bad as the the current American ideology, the progressive ideology is, I'd rather have that than most of what the rest of the world has. I mean, I think I can see how bad things are much better than these people. But regardless of that, that's kind of a tangent, to be honest. I don't see how this eternal revenge or the idea of revenge, the dream of revenge, would be anything other than. I mean, I don't see how the reaction to the secessionist ideas would be anything but this dream, this wet dream of, oh, these people are bad, they are racist, they are this and they are that. So, what would be better than making them follow our will and controlling them and never giving them what they want, even though we all here know that this only breeds um, more resentment and can become something quite ugly. I wouldn't be surprised if in the U.S. Secessionist movements got some traction. I mean, people have talked about national divorce and things like that, and I don't think the consequences would be necessarily terrible. And for Brazil, I think it's the same in this regard. I don't see how a secessionist movement being triumphant would really change the lives of anyone who stays in Brazil. I really don't see.
You reminded me of an aspect that I forgot to say, that which is pretty ironic regarding nationalists, right? As always, is that how Americanized are our our worldviews, right? Because when you talk about secession, you necessarily have to reference the American Civil War, and you say, oh, the guys who tried to succeed were the slave owners, therefore succession bad. So even if people do not admit this, even if people do not even notice this, our worldview is pretty dominated by this ghost of the American Civil War, right? Even if it doesn't make sense at all, when you look at the historically the the southern succession movements during the Farroupilha War, I think the proper translation would be the Ragtag War, and there you have the fight between uh, a new state, right, the Piratini Republic, which had some slaves, used some slave labor, but they were fighting against the big slave owner in the Americas, right, the biggest slave empire in Americas. So it's not that, morally speaking, in that regard, uh, is not that clear cut. And even the first slaves in Brazilian history to get liberty were the ones who fought in this war, right? The ones from the southern state, because they were,
Yes.
yeah, during the final dealings, the peace treaty, they were able to get liberty. There are even some shady stories about this from the part of the empire. I'm not getting into this, but now trying to address the main question of this episode that Hermit has brought up. Is it good or bad? Is it a solution or a problem or a new problem? And my view is that it depends on the motivations. I personally, I would love that motivations for any kind of secession movement would be as enlightened as I can make up in my mind. But the thing is, most of the times that's not the case. When you look at Brazil, for instance, many times it's money, basically, right? I don't want to pay that much in taxes. I don't get the same returns that those other states gain. That can be a legitimate reason, but it's not that much, right? It doesn't. It's a very superficial way of looking at things, actually. And sometimes you see even more out there stuff, right? You see even ridiculous stuff. You have those profiles, which I don't really know if it's clickbait or not, that not only daydream about separating certain states from Brazil, but joining a certain union. You see a lot of people talking about the South Cone. Oh, let's make this coalition of southern states from Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay and Chile and so on. Why do you want this? It's a completely materialistic way of view of things. Oh, those places that are more wealthy, therefore those things will be good. It has no consideration for the cultural difference and so on. How much Argentinians would reject us, actually, how much tension would have if we cannot identify ourselves properly with the rest of Brazil. Imagine with Spanish-speaking countries. I know there's some zone of cultural exchange between southern Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay. It has some cultural exchange, but most of it is in the past. I have actually talked with some gauchos lately, asking about their experience. Oh, how much you know those places? And they're basically saying, oh, there are some big farmers who have property on both in different countries, and they have more contact with different peoples. But the average Joe is too isolated for this. One thing you do not consider when you look back at those different wars, those wars of succession, the formation of the countries. It's how underdeveloped the statal mechanisms were, right? When you look at modern countries nowadays, the state apparatus is so much more developed that this kind of process would lead to a lot of friction. Secession itself would lead to a lot of friction. Imagine joining many countries in a single entity. People are a bit too naive about it, right? They're a bit too delusional about it. But in my mind, a proper succession movement, a justified one, would be concerned not only with money, but also with security and identity properly. Look, to be honest, as much as I favor secession in principle, I'd rather have I'd rather see my region here, my home region, be more concerned about its identity and seeing people more concerned about who they are, where they came from, where they want to go, and have this more cohesive notion of who they of their identity, of their overall identity, than just succeeding for financial reasons and becoming just another state, just another bureaucratic run territory, right? Just being more of the same. I'm more concerned about the motivations. If people here had a stronger sense of community and identity and who they are and what they want for their lives and what is important, that's preferable to simple succession, to simple political division, right? So, in my mind, the bigger problem is this. It's not that I would oppose this, but I wouldn't be as enthusiastic as something that is only concerned about the material aspect, or or I don't know, even more superficial stuff. I can see it as a reaction process, which is justified as well when you feel threatened. You can look at the case of South Africa, for instance, the Volksstaat, Orania. You cannot say that they are they're naive, they're delusional, they're superficial about it. It's a matter of safety, right? Of security. If they don't form a perimeter where those Afrikaners, those Boers can live, they are entirely susceptible to the actions of the vengeful South African state. So I can see it being justified here in those terms as well. We can even argue that we're going that route, right? Episode 7, if I'm not mistaken, South Africanization of Brazil. Maybe at some point it's become a necessity. Who knows? And it would be nice to start planning from it from now on. And so I see there are cases where when I consider it pretty a lot very justified, but I wouldn't be enthusiastic about any succession movement in principle, and I wouldn't even consider them positive when it's motivated by this superficial stuff or even some delusion that of optimizing borders and so on, and pretty much a paradox mentality, a paradox game mentality. But instead of making those blobs with your color, you keep creating those client states because it's more efficient. This is playing with different societies, different peoples, different cultures, and so on. It is never that easy, and this kind of naivety, it's detrimental. In that case, I even consider it creating a new problem for sure.
Just a quick observation, but your point reminds me a little bit of Brexit, because there were some people who voted for Brexit because of supposed tax benefits and things like that. But I think most people were pretty aware that things could get even maybe worse. Farage didn't shy about that, and most of them knew that it wasn't the point. And to be fair, things really did become worse. But they now at least have the advantage of knowing where exactly inside of Britain the problem is, because yes, now Britain isn't a part of the EU anymore, but they still have a lot of problems. But maybe now they can focus on their own issues instead of Belgium's or something. But I was just gonna say that in that case, there was also a history, a really long history, that even when the EU was formed, they didn't know if England should be part of it, because unlike the rest of Europe, they're not continental, right? There was even a famous de Gaulle. I don't know how to say French, but the de Gaulle, the then prime minister who freed Algeria, by the way, he was against the participation of England, and he was the liberal uh, back in his day. So now, for some reason, they were shocked that Britain wanted to get out, which kind of goes back to my point. I think it's I don't want my enemy to have what he wants to, kind of thing.
Yeah, you can look at cases like, which is the name of the new party in UK? Restore.
Reform.
It's Reform.
It's Restore Britain.
Yeah, you had Reform before, and now you have this.
It's Reform UK and Restore Britain. These are two different parties.
True, with Rupert Lowe, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yes, okay. The guy Elon Musk made a tweet about, yeah.
Yeah, you can start wondering: is this kind of thing would this kind of thing be allowed inside the European Union framework? Because it's a kind of a radical party, right? They're pretty unapologetic about remigration and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, England, Britain hasn't. The problem wasn't solved, but now at least they can take care of their own business. I don't think the EU would allow that at all. But maybe now, I don't think Britain's going anywhere. To be honest, I think they're kind of screwed. But um, if there is light at the end of the tunnel, that's probably the way to go.
You have touched on some good points, Beppe, which I think illustrates well what is my main concern with secession, which I view basically as a kind of last resort, as a desperate move, uh, more than a plea or a cry for self-identity. I see it often as a desperation move, because I believe most people, when they are inside of a bigger country, want to remain part of that bigger country, but to be respected. I think, for instance, of the American Civil War, where there used to be a gentleman's agreement with the Missouri Compromise, but the North eventually became very aggressive when it came to insisting on the creation of free states. And, it's a whole complicated historical mess. But in large part, the South still wanted to be part of the US. It just wanted to have its own heritage respected. And in the same way, when we think about Brazil, a lot of Southern particularism or secessionism is an attempt to try to bring to light the issues of their identity and their, nationhood not being preserved. It goes back kind of to the myth of Brazilian identity, because this false notion of Brazilian identity alienates a lot of people who have developed, a lot of nations which have developed a identity for themselves. But as we have explained back then, and as we are explaining now, are caught in the crossfires of those who have basically no identity and who cling to this resentment and this kind of participation through the democratic means on the suppression of these movements kind of give this satisfaction of, as Emerald said, of putting someone down under your boot. And secession is basically a cry against that. Is a cry of a people who have basically exhausted all possibilities, who see no solution in democracy or even in institutional change because they have seen a country drift so far away from their own cultural standing that they begin to see it as alien. Uh, we have talked about a lot of examples of secession movements, which have failed to mention the most pressing one, and the one who looks like the most probable to, cause problems in the future, which is the Flemish in Flanders in Belgium, which, if for those who are not into that history, the Flanders and Wallonia, which are the two parts who compose Belgium, are basically two different countries. One speaks Dutch and is Protestant, the one speaks French and is Catholic. They were joined together in a kind of a Frankenstein of a nation for explicitly balance of power reasons. And up to this day, the Flemish are very unhappy with this arrangement, and they have their national party, which has done well in the recent elections. So, no, maybe some people are looking forward to Flemish secession, but what usually happens is that people resort to secession when they have exhausted all means, and especially all democratic means. One place you can see this the ugly face of it is Ireland, which up to this day suffers from the issues of loyalist versus Irish nationalism and so on. So that's how I view secession, and I don't know if you guys agree, as a last resort of a people who have tried very hard to work within the conquering nation or the imperial nation, but have long since felt alienated and don't see a lot of change or possible change in the institutional or political future.
I pretty much agree. It is a last resort. If you're inside a system that kind of works already, why would you go through the work of creating a new one, right? Of separating things and all that stuff. There is no proper incentive. So I'm pretty much in agreement with you that it's a last resort. But if it's a resort, why not using it? I mean, it actually I didn't know much about the case of Belgium nowadays. I knew about the history of the two territories, but I didn't know it was that serious nowadays. Those are the kinds of things that only Europe does for you, right? Uh, but when I look at the case of, I'll always bring back to Brazil. I'm sorry, I'm to southern Brazil. I'm sorry because that's my main focus. I mean, trying to work inside the system is something that has been tried for a lot of time, and many times revolts and separatist movements and so on have actually served as this exchange currency for getting something, right? There's some kind of mockery from other regions saying, "Oh, you," especially about gauchos, right? People from the northernmost state, Rio Grande do Sul. You still celebrate this war that you lost. You keep celebrating losers and so on. But actually, when you look at certain stuff, the main stakeholders, quote unquote, of that war, they ended up gaining something. They reached the deal agreement. One of the motivations of the war is the fact that taxes that the federal government was imposing in the production of dried meat here made it so that buying this dried meat from Rio Grande do Sul was more expensive than buying it from Argentina, Uruguay, and so on. So it was a artificial disadvantage. And at the end, I think they got some agreements to remove those taxes and so on. So even if the movement doesn't succeed entirely, it can serve as this leverage, right? It can serve as this exchange currency for negotiation. So I think it's, even if you don't achieve the initial results, it can be still positive in negotiating if the rest of the country does not respect you. And when you look at Brazil, you have centuries of this kind of alienation. The South is a bit of of a periphery, has always been a bit of a periphery. Even during this formation, with Spanish territory that was progressively conquered and so on. You have the destruction of Jesuitic missions. I can give you a long rundown of all the particularities of this place. But the thing is, I agree, it's a last resort, but it's a legitimate one. And if things keep staying the same as they are, and actually keep getting worse, because you have more hostility, you have more resource extraction, you have more alienation. I mean, when you consider Brazil, it's so crazy. We have supposedly this federation, and it's even illegal to have local parties, local political parties. Look at a state like Germany, which is much smaller in comparison. You had, I'm not sure how things are nowadays, but for a long time you have a Bavarian, right? A Bavarian party, a political party only concerned about the interests of Bavaria, and they will only care about it. I cannot create a Southern party. If I do this, I'm an illegal. It's a crime. I cannot even talk about secession. That's illegal. Uh, People try to make some kind of informal vote, informal campaign to collect votes and so on, but even that was a bit iffy regarding the legality of it. So in the situation where even debating the issue it's threatened, I can pretty much agree. It's a last resort, but it's the only resort available in my view. It, you can say it's negative. It shows a failure of the entire system. With that, I agree as well. But things reach a point where you have to understand that system is maybe beyond salvation. Brazil, for instance, is a big country trying to fix the entire stuff, the entire political system, the entire exploitation of from northeastern elites, for instance, who keep exporting those politicians to get more and more resources. Fixing this is a huge, it's an almost impossible task. It's an Herculean task. So things get to the point where the only solution is to divide. Other people will say that the way to address, to approach a big problem is to separate into many small problems and solve each one at a time. Maybe that's the case. Separate things and try to start over. Okay, let's rebuild stuff. Let's try to reset the political institutions and see if we can get this past experience to build something better. I pretty much agree. It reveals the failure of a system. But maybe if this system has failed beyond salvation, as sad as it is, you have to start over.
What I was going to say is that my primary concern in this whole discussion is that people are spending too much energy and are putting too much emotional eggs in the basket of secession, when really what should be addressed are the problems which lead to people wanting secession. And that has always been my number one gripe, because people get so upset and so emotionally attached to the idea that, you know, some southern states want to secede, but they don't direct the same energy to addressing these problems which cause them to want to secede. It is a very frustrating thought, because it reveals a kind of a lazy and decadent movement which only cares about how it looks. And as you said yourself, Beppe, it is a kind of a paradox game mentality which only cares about how you look on the map, but your country is full of debuffs and has 0% stability and whatnot. But you know, as long as it looks good, or you know, as the integrity of the Brazilian nation is preserved. But as you said, at some point you might think, at what cost is this unity being preserved? Because, you know, if we think about a scenario where Brazil is colonized entirely by I don't know, Haitians, Brazil is being swarmed by Haitians. Are you going to secede the part of Brazil uh, who's still not colonized then in order to prevent that or not? Uh, that goes into my point of why I think secession is not so much of a good idea, or at least why I don't see it as the first solution, because I see first, at least I put first in my order of things that one should try to expand before ever considering to retreat. To which I say, instead of southern states retreating onto themselves, the southern states should actually try to do what the Northeast does, which is colonize the rest of the country culturally and politically. I know this is not possible under the current regime because of the way the federation and the laws and all the incentive structures are done, but that's what has to primarily change instead of retreating into one's own bubble. But I digress. My point is not to harp on secession being not the number one solution or anything like that. My point is that much more focus has to be put on addressing the claims that lead people to want to secede instead of trying to attack secession itself as a resort or as a moral failure or whatever people want to call it. And the main issue, I think, is identity and representation. I mean, historically, representation was the thing which caused secession in all places, from Ireland to the southern states to even the Flemish or the Catalans. Representation was always the issue, and is forever going to be the issue. And the future of Brazil has a clear choice in mind. Do we want to keep representing? Do we want to keep being the government of the outcast of or the downtrodden? Do we want to be the government of the northerners and northeasterners and the urban periphery, or do we want to be the government of the successful Brazil, of the southern Brazilians or the industrial heartland and etc.? And this is to me the big point going forward. And I really am skeptical of the democratic solution that everyone is just going to get along and every state is going to be represented equally and fairly. At some point, one has to predominate, and by today, which is prevailing is the failing Brazil, which is colonizing the successful Brazil, and that's why we are on this road to Kinshasa.
Okay, about that, yeah, I agree that democratic solutions are pretty hard to have. But when you mentioned that addressing the reasons for succession, the issue is, and you're aware of this as well, that many people who oppose it, who have the paradox game mentality, want to see the size of the map and not the debuffs and so on. They simply do not recognize those problems as legitimate. If I say, oh, we have an issue nowadays with internal migration, we can northeastern states, northern states use the southeastern and southern states as this dump bin, right? Oh, let's export our problems, all this exceeding quote unquote population that's giving problems. Let's export them, and they will handle it. If you complain about it, if you point it out, there's all those. At least people say that's not a problem. Oh, that's a good thing because they're going after jobs and so on. There's too many people here. There's not enough jobs, which is a lie. But they'll try to sell it as positive, or will call a racist, a xenophobe, and so on. So they will never recognize this as a legitimate problem for starters. And fighting for this inside the system, inside the broader system, uh, as we had this recent experience with, I know, with Bolsonaro, for instance, it was kind. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it was a frustrating experience. I can see that many people could be disillusioned by it and say, okay, we cannot fight this bigger fight.
Well, if I may add, I think that secession, okay, people might not address the issues that lead people to want to secede. That's a very fair point. But I don't see why, after a secession happens, why it wouldn't be possible for people to understand, looking back at how things actually happened, as to why they got to that point. The term national divorce is kind of like is used kind of like a thing to, like, we're gonna separate, we're still gonna be, connected in a way, we'll have our history together, but we're separated now, like we're not the same thing anymore. But it doesn't mean we have to hate each other, it doesn't mean anything like that. So I think that secession can happen in that way. For example, let's say the southern states secede, and they fix one or two things that were really important for them, and people are happier and things like that. um, why would it not be possible for the rest of the country to take a look at that and start to address them after they see in practice what was happening? That's a genuine question. I don't know how.
Yeah, but that's a very rational way to approach things, right? And maybe things are not that rational.
Well, that's, I don't think it's rational in the sense that I think it would happen naturally. Eventually, people would just start seeing. I'm not saying it's gonna take 1 year. I'm not even gonna say it's gonna take 10 years. I don't know, but time would show that people would be happier. So there was a point to what they were complaining about.
No, I can see some people looking at this and reaching those conclusions. Oh, they did this and that right. But when you look at our case, for instance, when you have some regions where the politics of a certain region, which is completely dominated by those century-old elites, were always were used to going to the federal government and taking money and taking this money for themselves and always pretending that they are doing something. They're not going to look at those potentially successful cases and say, oh, I want to do this, because that means they will lose power. What they want to do is to the only thing they will see there is a scapegoat. Oh, things are bad here because those guys have succeeded and they took our wealth from us. They have always exploited us, and now they left with the money, right? It reminds me of that. There was that counter Catalan Secession ad where they were making some parody of a scene from Monty Python. You know that what have the Romans done for us? And they were basically saying, oh, what have the Spanish done for us? And they list a lot of things that arguing that, oh, Catalonia is so rich and developed because the federal government has invested so much in them, and now they are leaving with all this wealth. So very few people, I see very few people actually looking at this and recognizing, oh, they're able to do something positive. I want to follow this model. They're basically saying, oh, look at we need to ask for reparations. We need to they have stolen from us. It's easier to see those things serving as a scapegoat than as a model for improvement. Sadly.
I think that's easier to, you may have some discourse around this, but in practical terms, politically, I don't think it's that easy to make something out of it. So in this kind of scenario, what I think would happen is something like what happens in the Balkans. Like they, frankly, they don't like one another all that much in general, but they kind of recognize that they are similar in many ways. They have a shared history, you know.
The shared history of hating each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's more of a cultural aspect. I don't see how you can translate this to other places. It's
Well,
almost
I
like
mean,
they hate each other so much that they are willing to take the economic cost of separating.
well, yes, but don't you see, like, don't you think that the regional tensions in Brazil are kind of getting out of hand?
Yeah, they're getting there, but it's this country has much more inertia, right? Right? Have much more people, have a much bigger territory. Things will move more slowly. Even fixing stuff will be harder, right? We cannot have people daydream about a Bukele moment, right? Oh, we need a new Bukele. Bukele is the president of a country which is smaller than smaller than the smaller Brazilian state. Fixing things, locking down all the criminals is relatively quick, right? They cannot run that much. They cannot run that far away. But when you look at Brazil, things are moving slowly for the good and the bad. It would take a long time and effort for things to reach a boiling point comparable to the Balkans, in my opinion.
Fair enough. But I still don't see how this resentment that you mentioned, like, oh, these people took things from us and whatever, how that would translate politically into something concrete that would hurt both um, both countries, you know, Brazil and whatever the name is of the southern states.
I'm not saying it would harm both, but would harm Brazil in the sense that if you have a scapegoat, you can still get away with political shenanigans that are the actual culprits for your people suffering, for instance.
Okay, fair enough. But frankly, I think at this point, I think that they would, if it's not that, it's gonna be something else. I I don't know. Maybe my expectations are too low for Brazilian politics.
I agree there has to be some solution, maybe a new federal pact and so on, but uh, there are so many conflicting interests. Anything that will reduce the amount of money sent to predatory states will cause a lot of uproar, will cause a lot of screams and accusations and name calling and all this. Is a tough fight.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's sometimes I just think the only way to approach this is to unilaterally decide we're leaving. But it's not that easy, right?
Uh, for sure, what I think would happen in a case of secession would be a very swift and probably very bloody and vengeful federal response. What probably in the same level as the American Civil War. Uh, you see what Beppe said very clearly in the case of Taiwan, for instance, or of South Korea, which are, you know, for a long time were parallel systems which kind of showed the flaws of the old Chinese system until it eventually became more, at least more economically developed and began to be able to project power outwards. In Brazil, any kind of sovereign secession or any secession for that matter would create a bad precedent which would quickly be looked with very bad eyes from the federal government and would be swiftly responded, especially because our military class is heavily influenced by those positivist and sovereignist types. And I hold no illusion that a secession movement could ever work. And again, I don't think a federal pact is possible either. I see the future of Brazil as, you know, only one cultural hegemon can exist, and it's either going to be the northeast or the southeast or the south or whatever. But there is no world where everyone gets to eat their own cake. You either set the table or you set the floor.
One thing that people have to consider for this, if you're still thinking about succession, you have to have stronger allies, right? Imagine Taiwan or South Korea without the backing of the US, for instance. They will never survive.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I see some people here who have those separatist sentiments, but they want to do things in this uh, completely independent way. That's not feasible at all. They have this also this anti-Americanism and so on, and find stronger allies. If not U.S., I don't know, if Argentina. Actually, some quick piece of trivia: when the leader of the uh, Farrapos rebellion started it, he received some offers from help, some offers of help from Argentina, if I'm not mistaken. He refused it. Amazing blunder. Maybe he could manage to carry out the revolution completely with some Argentinian support, but he didn't want to. And if this is done in a very naive way, I agree. Uh, it would be much more detrimental, and you'll be punished for this. But on the other hand, I have seen this argument before that, oh, trying to succeed will just make the federal government punish the rebellious region even more. And that's a matter of, okay, do you want to suffer quickly or do you want to suffer slowly? Because the same processes that will supposedly happen as punishment for trying to succeed are the ones who are already happening many times. I mean, oh, they will just flood the south with northeastern. Okay, but that's already happening. They will just put a bigger tax on you. Okay, but that's already happening. So, do you want to suffer slowly and silently or with a bang?
I think the military action thing is kind of tricky nowadays because everyone has like a camera and their cell phones, and people do not like to see violence. So in social media, when they're seeing like their friends being attacked or things like that, I think the government reaction to such a thing, the military reaction, would be very unpopular. And I don't think any government would be able to survive that because I mean, but what Beppe said about international support from overseas or something, that's really something deeply that I see no other way around it. Yes, it would not be possible without support, but maybe uh, I heard somewhere, I don't remember where, but the US are like the police of the world because they are kind of the bodyguard of the world too. So it's not impossible to imagine a country like them or someone else doing intervening or supporting that. But yeah, I don't see how a civil war scenario would happen. To be honest, not in this day and age.
Yeah, because you see, as much as the crackdown may be ugly, if your movement have no guaranteed legitimacy from other powers, you're basically alone. People will will say something bad, will publish some notes condemning the actions of the federal government and so on because of the crackdown. But if your movement does not have legitimacy, everybody will be wanting for the return of the status quo.
Yeah, for sure. On this notion of foreign support for independence, I am 100% with you that unless there is some one goodwill between the government you are succeeding from or from an or two from an international patron, succession or secession is basically impossible. The the only successful secession movements were those with which with either or. For instance, the American War of Independence or the revolution of 1776 or whatever you want to call it was basically only possible because of the two actually, because the U.S. had the backing of France and Spain because they really hated England, but also because there were a large number of British Parliament members which were very sympathetic to the American cause. So with all those two things, America could not win from the British military, no shot. And the same has to be true everywhere else. You guys have mentioned Taiwan and South Korea, which are very good examples. But we could also think about the decolonization of Africa or even the British Empire. The reason why these countries seceded was basically because France and England allowed them to, because militarily they were more powerful, and because they had powerful proponents of decolonization by the way of Americans and Soviets. So people think of the Vietnam, for instance, of the whole fiasco in Vietnam, both from the French and the Americans, as this great self-liberation. But you know, there was a lot of Chinese and Soviet guns, mainly Soviet guns, flowing there, and a large public inside the US which were favorable to the Vietnamese, not to the Americans. So there's that. And the question then becomes, is there any public patron wanting to advance this cause? By that, you have to turn to Brazil's enemies, or at least its political enemies, not necessarily its country enemies. And also, is there any goodwill between the new secession movement and the Brazilian national government, or some part of it? And that also, I don't think it exists. But if we could imagine a scenario, for instance, where the Northeast tries to secede, it would probably have much more chances of succeeding, exactly because our ruling elite is largely sympathetic to them, which will probably facilitate their process. And on what Emerald said about war not being popular in the age of the TV and especially of the smartphone, I would have to add that it depends very much on the narrative, because, for instance, if the sovereign state would secede, they would, of course, be framed as racist white guys. But if the northern states were to secede, they would be, you know, freedom fighters for the rights of the natives or something. So the narrative always carries the most emotional weight, more than anything you show on your screen, because both sides can see the same phenomena but experience different subjective realities. They will process, oh, that's a racist being killed, I don't care, or they will say, oh, that's my countryman being killed, I do care. So the framing of the narrative, I think, carries all the weight, basically.
Well, for sure, but I think it's kind of different in this case, because it would be like people who are one or two connections away from you, or people that you know, or things like that. And also, I don't know how much the narrative is so, how much it can be so directed in one single way. I think it's very difficult to have this power over narrative when it comes to real life, real time things. Especially when it's people who you can actually understand, and you don't have to, you can see the videos in real time and things like that. Yes, they would. I'm sure they would try to frame it in this way, but frankly, I don't see it being effective.
Well, I don't think there is going there is going to be, or there would be, total control over the narrative. What I think the main issue is that we're living in a fragmented narrative world where there are so many multiple and competing narratives that uh, basically everyone's going to believe what they want to believe. And if for instance northeastern Brazilians just want to see Southerners as racist, and Southerners just want to see Northeasterners as lazy free riders, that's all they're going to see. That's the narrative they're going to stick. There is not going to be communication. And as enmity grows, and as things spirals out of control, that's the boxes people are going to retreat into.
Well, I don't think we have gotten to the point of people hating one another to this point. We're not even in the Balkan point, like we were talking earlier. So I think people would perceive it as their obnoxious little brother, being murdered. I mean, he's annoying. He's very annoying, but he's still like not to this point. He doesn't deserve to be killed. I think we are divided, yes, but I don't think it's even to the point of the Balkans, and I don't even think the Balkans would enjoy to see uh, the uh, their neighbors being massacred or something. Uh, I may be wrong. Of course, this is all speculation, but I think we're living with people who we hate this much would be way more difficult than it is right now. I think people are still very tolerant um, about well, not very, but they're more tolerant than it would be in this scenario where they would support their opposition to be killed. You know.
Well, I'm a bit more black pilled about it, to be honest, because when you look at the recent, not that recent, I think it was 2 years ago, we had the floods in Rio Grande do Sul, right? Southeastern Brazil. Huge floods, very traumatic. And maybe that's internet augmenting stuff, it always is, but I've seen plenty of people kind of not necessarily celebrating, but saying, "Oh, you kind of deserved it, right?" It's punishment. Oh, you say you think you're so much better than us, which is a straw man interpretation of some identitarian movements. You think you're so much better than us. Now take care of yourselves. Now enjoy the floodings and so on. Uh, I've seen plenty of this. I think there's a level of resentment which is as I said, internet. There's a bunch of crazy people there, but I see there's some level of resentment that it's approaching the breaking point.
Well, I remember that very well, and I think it is an internet thing, and maybe you didn't perceive it because it's so closer to you. But in real life, people were not like everyone was only crazy, green-haired Twitter users were doing that, and I frankly do not remember one single person who was unironically celebrating these things outside of Twitter.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. But I mean, what I know from reports is that when it comes to help, actually helping in this case and helping to fix stuff and save victims and so on, it was almost a local thing, right? You have people only from closer states sending help. There was cases of people
The
from
government was making it hard for people to help them.
yeah, and they even took advantage of this by playing some political shenanigans, right? They almost removed the governor from power and put this interventor, which is super close to the president. They were actually taking advantage of situation to increase control over the state, federal control of their state, without helping with anything. I mean, you look at this and say, instead of helping us, they are making things harder. How can we deal with this?
Well, yes, but I think that was mostly a government thing. I remember many people were actually trying to even Neymar tried to send some helicopters and things with to help people and stuff, and also who was the guy from São Paulo? Anyway, he was talking about how the people fiscalizing were making everything difficult. So I mean, it was a very peculiar issue, but I don't think that um, people were hating the South or something.
Yeah, but if it's the government making things harder, isn't it even more serious? I mean, institutionally, uh, people are determined to screw us up. So why are we still being part of this?
Oh, absolutely. But what I mean, this point was brought up because I said that I think people would react very negatively to seeing a civil war.
I see. Yeah, but you can look at the consequences. This same government is the one running the education, is the one running the government propaganda. We have commented here how delusional it is nowadays. Uh, I can pretty much see they over and over start promoting the narrative of those villains, right? We see this already, right? Oh, there's the playboys. Oh, look, anyone who wins above 5,000 reais are playboys. And when you look at distribution of per capita earnings, though they're more concentrated in southeast and south regions, so they start becoming the villains by proxy. So if the government is so it's so not only different but almost apparently dead set on harming those places, those regions of the country, what are they going to do to promote that mentality uh, nationally?
Well, we are all liberals here. We all want to see the good side of people and we expect them to behave in a proper manner. But as Beppe said, it is really clear to me that the current Brazilian government and the possible future Brazilian governments don't govern for the whole country, but governed by their specific political clients, which are, of course, the coalition of the downtrodden, which I have talked about in the past, and the financial elites and all those who the bureaucratic elite who maintain themselves in power. And what I see is a clear movement, especially in government official propaganda, of trying to demonize its opponents, of trying to paint them as villains, as Beppe said, and it's a process of normalization which has been going on for quite a while, and people can chalk it up to uh, internet hysteria as much as we want, but increasingly more, this line between internet and real life, it's becoming more and more meaningless. People are too terminally online for their own good, and what they see is in a lot of ways much more real than what they really live in. So internet stories are very good to create commotion and to create a reaction out of people. Even can see this very vividly in a phenomenon which we are, near days of experiencing, which is the so-called FELCA law, or the Child Protection Law Brazil version, which was basically spurred on by a single video a guy made on the Brazilian internet. So it had real effects, and of course, the guy didn't make it out of himself. He has, big, powerful donors everywhere trying to make this happen. But I don't see it being any different with anything else this government is doing, which is attempting to push a specific agenda pander to some people to empower themselves.
No, I have to push back a little bit because I still don't see it as like an internet phenomenon. I think it was, I mean, by internet phenomenon, the hatred towards Southerners during the floods, right? I don't think it was an internet phenomenon. I think it was specifically an X phenomenon, a Twitter phenomenon, because I swear to God, I have not seen anything like of the sort of that Beppe is saying anywhere else. I haven't, and I think that Twitter, for good and for bad, for better for worse, is the the most loud when it comes to negative opinions. So I mean that's usually I think that's something good because it shows how people are in their worst, and their worst is usually what's most, you know, influential in a way or most real. But in big scales like this, I don't think it's a good thermometer for what people are thinking or saying. I really don't.
I agree. On one hand, going out and touching grass is a good medicine for
No, no,
this.
no. You don't even have to touch grass. You just have to leave specifically Twitter.
No, I see, I see. But in relation to Twitter, I guess, touching some other kinds of digital grass, for instance, it's a good medicine for this perception that we're in the brink of civil war. But on the other hand, I agree with Hermit that we need to get over this "it's only the internet" thing. I know we're not talking about the internet as a whole, only X, but there are people who still say this, oh, that only exists on the internet. But that makes some sense in a society run by Gen Xers or Boomers or so on. But progressively, over and over, being real on the internet makes it being real in real life, because that's the reference people have. We cannot go around the entirety of the Brazilian territory knowing by themselves what's going on. We focus on our main source of information is not even the television anymore. It is the internet. So it shapes your perception. So I think we need to take it more seriously, progressively more seriously. Not necessarily in this particular case. I understand your point. Fair enough. But if I keep seeing this on X, which is a big platform, is a big representative what the most influential people are thinking, uh, it starts to make me worry more and more.
No, other if it were any other example, I would agree with you. But in this specific scenario of the floods, I think it was not like an internet thing, and I agree. The internet is more and more real than by each day. And imagine, for example, what would happen if AI chatbots started to give people ideas. I found out recently that even Reagan was shot because the guy who shot him thought that a TV actress was going to love him if he did it. So, yeah, I think that these abstract things, abstract quote unquote, like media, TV, and internet, and things like that, are very much influential and real, and I don't deny that at all. But that's still not my point exactly. I just think that tragedies are still something that um, move people mostly. Maybe in 10 years, things will get worse. I mean, we have seen things from 10 years ago becoming more normalized, things from Twitter 10 years ago, that is. So maybe yes, but I don't think we're at that point yet.
Yeah, we're definitely not. I mean, maybe I'm anticipating the issue a little too much. But I see your point that if you try to get more feedback from people, you end up realizing that things are not that bad.
Yeah, people still, Brazilians at least, still mostly use the internet for things that are non-political.
Yeah, that's crazy to think, honestly. Sometimes I notice this and I say, "Oh, how much in a bubble I am."
Yes, who the hell is Virginia, dude? I still don't know.
I'm sorry. I think I was responsible for deviating from topic a little too much, talking about the floods. But uh,
Civil War.
Civil War, yeah, yeah, and that's something that I was thinking. I think Hermit mentioned that uh, there's no way for each region, each faction to have its own cake, to eat its own cake, right? It has to be a case where one rules and the other ones follow. And as there are no democratic solutions here, surprisingly, I'm bringing Olavo de Carvalho again, uh, commenting about this. It's obvious. It's the obvious of the obvious that restoring democracy cannot be made via democratic means. So you need to get power and use power regardless of what the general people think. But in order to fix the country, you have to amass power. In order to succeed, you have to amass power. My question is, which one of those requires more power? Because if you have a certain goal and at some point you have enough power to do something else, why wouldn't you do that, right? In my view, fixing the country requires amassing more power than succeeding. So why are you going for the more difficult stuff? In the scenario where the system uh, has broken down, right? Your democracy doesn't work anymore. You have no representation anymore. In order to take hold of this system, you probably need much more than which would be required to get enough influence for a secessionist movement. So why not doing the easier stuff? If that's easier.
Well, the way I look at it is that secession movements are searching for representation. One example which I wanted to give, which is very illustrative of what we're talking about, is about the São Paulo's independence, which happened in somewhere between 1932 and 1936, 1934. I don't know exactly, but before that, the state which dominated Brazilian politics was São Paulo, but here it is, São Paulo in 1932 declaring independence. How is that? And a lot of people are going to say, or have this imaginarium of São Paulo seceding as trying to create a new country, a Paulista Republic or whatnot. But what actually was the case is that São Paulo was revolting by trying to get back its old privilege it had in the São Paulo's Mina agreement, the milk and coffee agreement. So there was a plan. The revolt was to get back to this old status quo of their dominance, because the elites at that time, the Paulista elite, knew that if they didn't take back power, the power would shift to a new center, and shift it did from the dynamic center of São Paulo or of the agrarian Brazil towards the bureaucratic centered in Rio. It was a real power shift moment, and the elites knew that and tried to capture that back. It failed, and the bureaucratic nexus of Rio became the new dominant power for at least 30 more years. So that's what I think about secession is either a power play in the sense of what São Paulo did, which is a more smart way of doing secession, or it's a less resource way in which your country ends up in ruins. And in the matter of, is secession easier than fixing the whole country? I think if you have the power to actually secede and enforce a secession, you would basically have the power to, take over the whole country. Because if you can take the whole country on yourself as a single state, you can basically take over the whole country, or at least claim the functioning parts of it. if it falls in a doomsday scenario. That's my opinion, at least. Well, that's just your opinion, bro.
Yeah. But when you look, for instance, at the American Revolution, let's take the most famous case. Um, they were not. I mean, to me, it's a legitimate secession, separatist movement. They were not trying to achieve more representation in the British Parliament. It was the not power play version of it, and in the end, became, you can say, pretty successful. So, isn't there a way to replicate this?
Well, yeah, as we have discussed previously, the American Revolution happened because parts of the British government were sympathetic to it, and because it had the backing of France and Spain. And by
Exactly. Yeah.
and by the same metric, imagine if a kind of United Statesian revolution happened in southern England at that time. One could easily imagine an armada of a combined armada of French and Spanish troops landing on Britain, and restoring the monarchy on it. It didn't happen because the British had a sound thing going, and didn't collapse. But they could have gone bankrupt. Who knows?
Beppe, you better start making Argentinian friends, man.
Yeah, especially nowadays, because the tendency, considering how things are going, the tendency is that Argentina will become the American proxy in South America, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's I can always think about more stuff to talk about, to say about it, but uh, we're approaching the 2 hours mark here, so I think it's a good moment to wrap up. I'm not sure if you guys want to add something else to this conversation as a final statement. You're free to do so.
Well, I guess I could reiterate my main point in all of this. I know we have kind of deviated a lot from the main points at times, but what I wanted to get across, and I hope I have, and if I haven't, here's the abridged version, and it is that people are having too much of an emotional response to secession, and on one side more than the other, and more energy should be directed either at addressing the powers which lead to addressing the issues which lead to secession, or of acquiring power so that you don't have to secede and you become the dominant power in the country. And that's basically my main message. And I hope you guys have managed to at least find something to agree or disagree, and have found it useful in your intellectual investigations.
Well, my personal opinion on secession is that it shouldn't matter too much, as long as, individual states or communities or whatever is trying to secede could at least, live the way they want to, or in a way that they would tolerate, a way that they felt it was better for them. Like we said many times in this episode, the fact that the idea of secession is on the table, it reflects the fact that there's something serious going on. And, well, while I do agree that it's ideally shouldn't be necessary, I think that it doesn't have to be something as awful as it may sound. If it happened in other countries in the world right now, I don't think necessarily it would have to end in a bloodbath. And in Brazil, I think it's not necessary for it to be a bloodbath, but it doesn't mean it's going to be something that is, magical. There's always some sort of hardship. It doesn't mean that people's lives are going to be better in, economic or material sense. But um, at the end of the day, I think it should be used as a kind of a game theoretical solution to many problems. No one's going to get exactly what they want but they can at least get something they tolerate. And that's when secession should be brought up. No one's gonna be completely happy. The idea is on the table because things are not good, but maybe, just maybe, it's something less painful for both sides.
Well, what I think I can still add is that yes, on one hand, all that, regardless of what to do, require amassing power, require conquering some positions in politics, finding allies, finding sympathetic congressmen inside your country, and so on. And maybe in the course of this project of amassing power, of gaining political capital, for instance, you end up finding a way to solve the problem which would motivate the secession itself, right? So you have to always keep in mind those motivations, as Hermit has reiterated many times, in order so that you don't reach a point that you're seeking the succession for no reason at all. You already have the ways to fix the problem, and you're seeking succession for the sake of it. But on the other hand, you also have to, and that's a point I haven't touched that much, is that you have to approach this in a cultural aspect as well, right? You have to the biggest effort, the biggest groundwork effort has to be regarding preparing the collective mindset of your closest people and all the people involved to deal with this idea in a more natural way. And maybe in the course of doing this, you end up solving the problem as well, right? Imagine in this ideal world, in this cookie cutter world, you start convincing people from not only the northeastern region, but even the southeast region, which is at many times very hostile to the south as well, that okay, having an identity, a local identity, is not a bad thing. Everybody should strive for it. Maybe things reach a point where succession doesn't even make that much sense anymore, because people are more used to the idea of okay, we can be part of the same political entity, but each one can have its own way of doing things. That would be a healthy way to address the issue. So I agree. There are many. You have to get the political, financial, uh, uh, cultural resources in order to do that. If you want to really get independence, but always keeping in mind that in the course of doing so, you may acquire all the tools to solve the problem with motivated that idea in the first place. So we cannot lose. We can never lose track of this. We always have to look at the first the deepest motivations for this. It cannot be just a how can I say this? It cannot just be out of vanity, out of paradox game mentality of changing the map for the sake of it. The way I can synthesize, I guess, all that has been said here is this: we cannot lose track of the actual motivations for trying to succeed. And always, if you're trying to pursue, if a certain group is trying to pursue that, it has to be done in a way that don't lose track of that stuff, so that you don't waste energy in a meaningless thing. So I don't know. Can you guys agree with this?
In other words, never do.
Never do.
Oh, I forgot to click here the push to talk, but yes, of course.
Okay, so once again, I want to thank Hermit and Emerald for helping me in this episode, and I wish to thank our audience as well for following us to the end of this. If you're still there, I hope you are, and I hope that you have abstracted some nice insights from this conversation, if you're interested in this topic as well. So for now, that's it. Once again, thanks everybody, and I see you in the next episode.